Welcome back. I'm David the Good for Prepper Advantage. Today we're going to look at 4 simple and free fertilizers for your garden. Maybe it's 3.5. I'm just going to report and you can decide. We've been doing a lot of burning lately. I'm clearing a big piece of land, and it's an unused piece with a lot of scrub, thorny trees, lots of thorny trees. So what I've been doing is making burn piles. Now this isn't a total waste. I'm gonna get some good fertilizer out of here, one of them being wood ashes. Just about everybody knows that you can use wood ashes in your garden, right? But maybe you didn't know that. Wood ashes are an excellent amendment. There's a couple things you need to know about them though. First of all, don't put them on when they're still hot. They'll burn your plants. Second of all, they're very alkaline. If you wanted to make your own soap, you could do a burn like this, let some water leach through those ashes, and you'd have homemade lye. Very, very alkaline. If you have acid soil, putting some wood ashes on is great. But if you have something like limestone soil, where it's very alkaline, putting wood ashes on is a bad idea. Some plants don't like their pH to go that high. So, what's in this stuff? Well, we've got calcium and we've got potassium, potash, and we have a sprinkling of other bits and pieces that are left after burning. But predominantly you're looking at potassium and calcium, both of which plants really like and really need. Let's just throw some of these around and make some plants happy, huh? My second fertilizer is one that everybody knows about. It's manure. This is actually sheep manure. A friend of mine keeps sheep, and he let me come in and dig out the stable and bring some manure back. Now, you're often going to be offered some manure. Somebody will say, oh yeah, you know, we have horses, or there's this place that keeps cows, or so-and-so has a goat farm, or whatever else. They've got piles of it, you can come and help yourself. In the United States, I would not use manure unless I knew it was a completely organic operation. That might sound like I'm some sort of extremist or something, but seriously, there are now toxins that have been sprayed for mostly about the last decade. Grazon and others, they contain Aminopyralids. Aminopyralids is a long-term persistent herbicide which can be eaten by the animal, go through its digestive tract, be composted for a year or two, and still destroy your garden. It is designed to kill broadleaf weeds, and most of your garden plants are broadleaf plants, and it can't tell the difference between weeds and vegetables. This is sprayed on a lot of pasture land. So purchased hay goes to the horses. Maybe they don't spray their pastures, maybe they think they're feeding their horses well, but the hay that's coming in may have come from fields that have been sprayed with this stuff. It goes through the animal's digestive tract. The manure composts, it's still there. It's a super persistent molecule. I lost $1,000 worth of plants in an entire growing season one year because of aminopyralid in manure. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was getting a good amendment for the garden, and I ended up destroying my entire garden. And since then, I've had a lot of people write in and share stories. They bought compost. Compost had aminopyralids in it. They bought manure. The manure had aminopyralids in it. A friend of them gave them a truckload of manure. They tilled it into the ground. They planted melons. They couldn't figure out why the melons all died. They can't figure out why their tomatoes are curling up, why their beans are curling up. It's absolutely insane, and it's in a lot of hay, and it's in a lot of manure. So manure is one of your best amendments for the soil. It gives you a lot of humus. It gives you a good bit of fiber for the ground. Basically, it's good for getting that tilth up, and it's high in minerals and in nitrogen. But if you don't know that it's coming from completely organically fed, non-sprayed systems, basically in the last 10 years, manure has become one of the most dangerous things you can put on your garden. And I've got all kinds of pictures on my website, thesurvivalgardener.com. If you go look it up, what has happened to people's gardens, people writing in and sharing their pictures. It's miserable. I even wrote about it for Mother Earth News. People are on it, they know it's happening, but a lot of gardeners haven't figured it out yet, and it's in the supply. But if I have manure, maybe from my own animals, and they've been grazing on my own land, and I know it's not been sprayed, I'll just take manure and I'll till it in every time I do a bed. I'll turn it into the ground, or I'll top dress around fruit trees. I'll throw it in my compost pile and use it to heat the compost pile up. If you use it really fresh, it'll often burn the ground because it has too much nitrogen in it. But if you let it compost for a few months and then spread it around, one of the best things you can add, so long as you know it's not been poisoned. This next amendment is one of my very favorites. It's actually so much a favorite of mine that I wrote a book on it, Compost Everything, The Good Guide to Extreme Composting, where I share how to pretty much turn everything in the world into soil, including your enemies. This is beautiful, finished compost. People have this idea that compost is like magic. Like, you have to get your carbon to nitrogen ratios correct. You have to have a 24:1 ratio. It's got to hit 100 and something degrees on the inside. You've got to turn it every couple of days. You have to have a complicated tumbler or a 3-bin system. And by the time people end up looking at all the list of rules for composting, they start just throwing their banana peels back in the trash. It's too much trouble. But compost doesn't have to be that much trouble. Really, all you have to do is find a corner of your yard and throw stuff there. Stuff that'll rot. I mean, fall leaves, kitchen scraps, eggshells, lasagna, doesn't matter. Throw it into a corner and let it rot down. This compost here, I didn't do anything for it. I'll show you where I got this compost. Got it off this slab that I'm sitting on right now. This slab is out front of an abandoned house that's been sitting here rotting, and we're borrowing this lot to farm on. So I decided to clear this little spot, and as soon as I started clearing the ground, I realized this whole concrete slab is covered with 2 to 3 inches of compost, because for the last 10 years or so, all the leaves have dropped here and rotted down into the ground. So all I had to do is scrape it up, and pick out the pieces of glass and junk that had been dropped here, and I've got beautiful finished compost, which took no work at all. You can pretty much just pile stuff on the ground and let nature do it. Everything goes back to the soil, and you can get finished compost without all that work. Sure, if you want to get compost quickly and you do the turning and you mix your ratios and all that sort of thing, but instead of burning your fall leaves, why don't you just pile them up in a corner of your yard? And then in a year or two, go over there and dig it up, and you'll find it's all full of earthworms, it's rich humus, and you've got compost for your gardens. This stuff here was just like that. Nature dropped it on the ground, she turned it back into compost, and I just have to scrape it up and put it in buckets, and I can use it on my garden beds. This final one, which you can call number 4, or you could call 3.5, depending on how you want to do it. It's another form of composting. And it's a form of composting which can be done in quite a few different ways. Compost tea. I've got a trash can right here, which is filled with compostable materials. Mostly nitrogen fixing tree leaves and weeds. And then I took some kitchen scraps and threw it in there. This is pretty much a swamp. You can see some eggshells in there. The swamp water. But this is loaded with minerals. Now this is the evil way to make compost tea. This is anaerobic tea. Pretty much sludge. But this sludge is awesome for the garden. So what I do is I just throw a bunch of stuff in here and I let it rot. I might throw some manure in here, some compost in here, some scraps from the kitchen in here, and I let it rot down for a period of time. Then I just strain it out and pour it at the base of my plants to water them. I call it Dave's Fetid Swamp Water, but it's anaerobic composting. If you want to make compost tea for the nice, sweet smelling compost tea and everything, what you have to do is get a container like this, put a little bit of compost into something like some pantyhose. I don't know, nobody wears pantyhose anymore, I don't think, but they're always used for everything in the garden. It's like all the gardening books were written in 1970s and they just quit doing anything else, but put it in some pantyhose or a mesh bag or whatever else, put it in a sock, you put it in some water, and you make sure that it's not chlorinated water, because chlorine will kill the organisms in the compost. And then you run a bubbler, and you might throw a little molasses in there for sugar, that kind of thing. There's a ton of that stuff on YouTube. I don't bother with all that. That's the way you can add compost organisms to the soil and a little bit of beneficial ecosystem and all that jazz. I just throw everything in some water and let it rot. I'll put some ashes in, I'll put Epsom salts in sometimes, just looking for a wide range of stuff, and as it deteriorates, it's going to break down, put the minerals in the water, then I will pour it out at the base of my plants. I don't use this slop on anything that we're going to be eating directly. Like I wouldn't water a salad garden with this, but when I've got my corn growing, my pumpkins growing, beans, when I do transplants, I'll take a little bit of this, thin it out with some water, and pour it on there. So it's my anaerobic compost tea. There are nice ways to make compost tea. This is not it. This is the lazy way, and it works for me. So there you go. 4 methods to feed your garden, pretty much for free, provided you can get some of these things around or light a fire in your yard or your neighbor has a cow. All free. And I hope that you'll be able to use some of these things in your garden, and then it gives you some ideas. It doesn't have to be all that complicated. There's a ton of stuff you can feed back to the soil. Just think about what those plants might want to eat and find sources for it. And don't worry so much. Gardening can be fun. It doesn't have to be a pain in the neck. Thanks for joining me. I'm David the Good for Prepper Advantage.